Abraham Lincoln was born February 12, 1809 in a log cabin in Hodgenville, Kentucky. He had two siblings and parents Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Lincoln. Thomas was a strong and determined pioneer who found a moderate level of prosperity and was well respected in the community. Due to a dispute over land, the Lincolns were forced to move from Kentucky to Perry County, Indiana in 1817, where the family unknowingly stayed on public land to scrap out a living in a crude shelter. Hunting game and farming a small plot, Thomas was eventually able to buy the land. When Abraham was only 9 years old, his mother died of trematol at the age of 34. The event was devastating on Abraham. A few months later after Nancy's death, Thomas married Sarah Johnston, a Kentucky widow with 3 children of her own. She was a strong, kind, and caring woman who loved her new family. Though both his parents were illiterate, Sarah encouraged Abraham to read. It was while growing into manhood that he received his formal education. In March 1830, the family again migrated, this time to Macon County, Illinois. At the age of 22, Abraham struck out on his own, making a living in manual labor. He was known for his skill in wielding an axe, and early on made a living at splitting wood for fire and rail fencing. Young Lincoln eventually migrated to the small community of New Salem, Illinois, where over a period of years he worked as a shopkeeper, postmaster, and eventually general store owner. It was here that Lincoln, working with the public, acquired social skills and a storytelling talent that made him popular with the locals. 2 years later, when the Black Hawk War broke out in 1832 between the United States and the Native Americans, the volunteers in the area elected Lincoln to be their captain. He saw no combat during this time, but was able to make several important political connections. After the Black Hawk War, Abraham began his political career and was elected to the Illinois State Legislature in 1834 as a member of the Whig Party. This political understanding led him to develop his early views on slavery, not so much as a moral wrong, but as an impediment to economic development. It was around this time that he decided to become a lawyer. After being admitted to the bar in 1837, he moved to Springfield, Illinois and began to practice at the John Stewart Law Firm. Over the years, Abraham had many relationships thought to be serious. He finally settled down and married Mary Todd on November 4, 1842. They had 4 children, one of which lived to adulthood. Years had passed, and Abraham had earned a respected reputation in politics. In 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repealed the Missouri Compromise and allowed individual states and territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. The law provoked violent opposition in Kansas and Illinois, and it gave a rise to the Republican Party. This awakened Lincoln's political zeal once again, and his views on slavery moved more toward moral indignation. In 1860, political operatives in Illinois organized a campaign to support Lincoln for president. On May 18, at the Republican National Convention in Chicago, Lincoln surpassed better-known candidates such as William Seward of New York and Salmon Chase of Ohio. Lincoln received not quite 40% of the popular vote, but carried 180 of the 303 electoral votes, making Lincoln the 16th president of the United States. Lincoln selected a strong cabinet composed of many of his political rivals, including William Seward, Salmon Chase, Edward Bates, and Edwin Stanton. Lincoln's cabinet became one of his strongest assets in his first term in office. Before his inauguration in March 1861, 7 southern states had formally withdrawn from the Union. By April, the U.S. military installation Fort Sumter was under siege in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. In the early morning hours of April 12, 1861, the guns stationed to protect the harbor blazed towards the fort, signaling the start of America's deadliest and costliest war. Lincoln responded to the crisis wielding powers as no other president had before him. He distributed $2 million from the Treasury for war materials without Congress's consent. He called for 75,000 volunteers into military service without a declaration of war, and he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, arresting and imprisoning suspected Confederate sympathizers without a warrant. The Union Army's first year and a half of battlefield defeats made it especially difficult to keep morale up and support strong for reuniting the nation. With the hopeful Union victory at Antietam on September 22, 1862, Lincoln felt confident enough to reshape the cause of the war, from saving the Union to abolishing slavery. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, which stated that all individuals who were held as slaves in rebellious states henceforward shall be free. The actions were more symbolic than effective, because the North didn't control any states in the rebellion, and the proclamation didn't apply to border states. Gradually, the war effort improved for the North, though more by slow destruction than by brilliant military victories. But by 1864, the Confederate armies had eluded major defeat. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee, commander of Virginia's army, surrendered his forces to Union General Ulysses S. Grant, and the war, for all intents and purposes, was over. Lincoln favored a policy of quick reunification, with a minimum of retribution, but he was confronted by a radical group of Republicans in the Senate and House that wanted complete allegiance from former Confederates. Before political battles had a chance to firmly develop, Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, by a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln was rushed from the theater to a house across the street and laid in a coma for 9 hours before dying the next morning. His body lay in a state at the Capitol before a funeral train took him back to his final resting place in Springfield, Illinois. Lincoln was a loving and determined man who believed in freedom and the unification of his country.